passionate about Dick. Now, the reason being is that after just about a week in Edinburgh, having lost my virginity at the Laughing Murphy's Irish pub, I feel that Dick has really made me reflect about tolerance. And the question that I want all of you to really answer is, do you have enough Dick in your life? Madam? Madam Toastmaster, fellow early birds and most welcome guests. Dick, which stands for Diversity, Inclusion and Comedy, I think is a very topical issue. We live in a very turbulent world, one increasingly, I think, tempered by indifference and intolerance and polarization of views. So with the period I spent in Edinburgh, it really made me think about diversity and inclusion in comedy, the role I have to play in that, and also as audience members, how does that impact us? As a comedian, or an upcoming comedian, Dick is about really understanding who you are and coming to terms with who you are. As an audience member, Dick is actually almost a barometer for tolerance. It tells you about what your tolerance is for other people's stories and other people's views. The reason why I'm so passionate about comedy is that for me, comedy allows us to tussle with taboo, to joust with injustice, and to dance with decorum. Comedy is a tool for change. And from my time in Edinburgh, I think there were three main takeaways that I had that will inform how I go further in the comedy world, as well as how I look at other people practicing comedy and as an audience member. Those three topics were unity, inclusivity, and also education. So when I think about unity, the baseline for comedy is actually shared experience. You can't really tell an effective joke if people don't have some kind of understanding of what you're talking about. And when I was writing my set for Edinburgh, I was really freaking out. I didn't know how to start my set. Some friends had been very kind enough to give me 5 minutes within their show, which was called Tick Boxes, so a group of 3 comedians, 1 Bengali lady, and 1 Irish Jamaican gentleman and another Irish gentleman. So I really wanted to make sure what I was doing kind of fit with their set, because I was a guest, but also being true to myself and who I was. So after a lot of stressing out, also talking to other comedians for inspiration, I actually looked within myself and thought, let me just be honest with myself and think authentically. And very interestingly, my set actually started like this. Comedy, good comedy, is about shared experiences. I am human, you are human. I am African. You were African. And funnily enough, this ended up being the perfect way to start my set. Just by being really honest with myself and how I was thinking. Because the statistics show us that most comedians happen to be, about 90% actually of comedians, happen to be straight white men. So I had that very much at the forefront of my mind as to how do I connect with people given that we have this difference. And then also with regards to unity and shared experience, I also added a bit to that set with regards to the Africa joke that we're all from Africa, which we are technically. So then went on to joking about, that the weather was too hot for you, that maybe the food was too spicy for you, maybe we should have created an African chicken korma to accommodate your needs. And again, I was riffing on that point of commonality. And I found that during my time in Edinburgh, there was one comedian that really stood out, that I'm, I guess, giving a bit of a shout out to, a Bengali British gentleman called Ishan Akbar. And he very cleverly managed to hit on these topics that I learnt about unity, inclusivity, and also education. His set was about the state of being a man in today's contemporary society, as well as spicing his entire set with his culture. And I use the spice there as a pun purposely. And it was such an amazing set, and I was so moved because he spoke about what it's like to be a modern man. He spoke about the #MeToo kind of wave of consciousness. And I think for me, the main takeaway was he was talking about male consent. And it was the first time he'd made us, or at least made me think about, do we think about men consenting with regards to sexual activity. And then I'll move on to my next example. So that was one key example. Another key example for me that I found through my journey in comedy, particularly at the Fringe, was that comedy is a really important tool for education. So I should mention that the other job that I was doing at Edinburgh was actually being a technical sound producer for a show called Charles and Jen. So both Charlie and Jennifer are actually two female bisexual comedians. So for me, if I'm being very transparent with you, bisexuality is something that I've been a little bit confused about. And again, pardon if that sounds like a pun, it's definitely not a pun on purpose. Because I've been, totally understand the lesbian, gay demographic, having friends from that background, but that's what people always say. Woke people say that they have friends, a black friend or whatever. But anyway, I mean that with real sincerity. So this was my first time spending a lot of time in an intimate setting with bisexual ladies. And by the end of the 3 or 4 shows that I was tech production for, I really had a whole new understanding of what it was to go through the world being judged for being bisexual. So that was a whole new level of understanding. And again, for me, I've realized that comedy is actually a very powerful tool for education. So using my point of view as a middle-class African diasporan woman, I can actually use this as a tool for education and a tool for raising difficult subjects. And then finally, I'd like to conclude, I think I've given you some highlights, and this is definitely something I want to talk about further, is that I think comedy shows us where we've come from, but also indicates where we can go to as a society. Comedy, I believe, is a barometer for tolerance. And I really do think we should all be thinking about getting more dick in our own lives.